This is the Iron Will Report for the week ending January 27th. Every week, my team and I work to bring you the counter-narrative news that legacy media won't report and that our government doesn't want you to hear. Once again, the WEF annual general meeting in Davos was dominated by discussions of pandemics and how to push yet more mRNA shots on the world. Former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair, in a panel discussion titled 100 Days to Outrace the Next Pandemic, has admitted outright that there will be more pandemics and that multi-shot vaccines will be needed, along with digital tracking of who and who is not injected.
Two things. One, that there is an ongoing challenge and opportunity, and I think that is not just about COVID. It's about the fact that we are going to have a whole slew of new vaccines. Digitization in healthcare is, I think, one of the great game changers. We should be helping countries to develop a national digital infrastructure, which they will need with these new vaccines. This issue to do with the technology and the digital infrastructure, I just want to emphasize how important I think that is. Because in the end, you need the data. You need to know who's been vaccinated and who hasn't been. Some of the vaccines that will come on down the line will be multiple. There'll be multiple shots.
Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla was also on the panel, along with CEPI CEO Richard Hatchett, Helen Clark, a former Prime Minister of New Zealand, and Shyam Bisham, a former Deputy Director of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Blair in 2020 called publicly for the use of digital IDs to track who is and is not vaccinated. Significantly, the term Blair used was their disease status, a clear attempt to label anyone not keeping up on their shots as a threat to public safety. The digital IDs to track our disease status are a concept being pursued by the Agile Nations program. Formed in November of 2020 by the WEF, the Agile Nations are a coalition of 7 countries whose stated purpose is to be an intergovernmental regulatory cooperation network. This is code for the foundations of a one world order. The 7 countries are Denmark, Italy, Singapore, Japan, the United Arab Emirates, the United Kingdom, and of course, Canada. If you hadn't heard about this, it's because Turd didn't want you to know. In fact, it was only last week that Conservative MP Leslyn Lewis revealed that Trudeau signed Canada on to the Agile Nations Charter in November of 2020, when everyone was being distracted by the COVID tyrannies. The Agile Nations program includes what they term 6 priority work streams. For those of you not fluent in doublespeak, I will translate. Data and communications means censorship and propaganda. Green tech means destroying the energy industry, resulting in lost jobs and people freezing in winter. Medical devices and treatments means pushing yet more pharmaceutical toxins on the people. Mobility means various strategies to take away our mobility. Professional business services means rule by a corporate oligarchy, specifically the members of the WEF. And pro-innovation approaches to regulation means how they are planning to move decision-making offshore and then have governments punish people who refuse to comply, while the henchmen at the national level claim indemnity because they were just following the International Health Treaty. And if you're in any doubt about that, let's look at who the members of this Agile Nations program are. Canada, of course, with young global leader graduates Trudeau and Freeland, and many other members of our federal and provincial governments with ties to the WEF. As for the leaders of the other 6, or at least those who were leaders in 2020 when the Agile Nations was founded, I easily found ties to the WEF for all but one. While I could find no direct ties to Halima Jacob of Singapore, I did learn that the presidency of Singapore is largely a ceremonial position, and that Singaporeans were very unhappy about the fact that she was not elected, but rather proclaimed, as there were, oddly, no other eligible candidates. In regards to my previous interpretation of what is meant by pro-innovation approaches to regulation, here's Tanya Fallon, leader of the Slovenian Social Democrats. Fan is also the author of several documentaries, including The Rise of the Extreme Right in Europe.
Once again, we have to take care of the rules of the international law and really respect that and not change it in a time when there are countries that choose the way not to respect them. And Russia chose that way. So we have countries that are respecting the rules, and we have countries that are respecting their national interests going beyond the rules. And that is what is happening, and we have to take into consideration the world order.
World order. They're not even bothering to hide their agenda anymore. If you've been watching my show, you will know that I have been continually reporting on the censorship bills being pushed through by our federal government. Bill C-11, the Internet Streaming Bill, Bill C-18, the Online News Act, and Bill C-26, the Telecommunications Act. And those are just the ones that are passed or about to be passed. There are several more that have been proposed. And in many cases, they're not even waiting for the act to be passed before adding yet more draconian amendments. According to Legislating, the government site where they are required by law to tell us what new dictates they're working on, posted in November was an amendment to Bill C-26, the second parliamentary reading of which took place in December. Notice the timeline of events? The second reading hadn't even happened yet when this amendment was added to it. The amendment, sponsored by Marco Mendocino, Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Measures Act henchman for Trudeau, proposes to give the government the following powers: to direct telecommunications service providers to do anything or refrain from doing anything that is necessary to secure the Canadian telecommunications system. Anything. They don't have to justify it. For example, they could order internet service providers to shut down access to any and all counter-narrative websites, or cut off cell phone service completely for people who have posted comments that our government doesn't like. And if the service providers refuse, it also establishes an administrative monetary penalty scheme to promote compliance with orders and regulations made by the Governor and Council and the Minister of Industry to secure the Canadian telecommunications system, as well as rules for judicial review of those orders and regulations. In short, comply with our dictates or be fined out of business. From bill not good to one that is, which is why most of you have never heard of it. In December, Bill S-223 received royal assent, which means it is now law. 223 is an act to amend the Criminal Code and the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act in regards to trafficking in human organs. Stay with me, folks. We're going down the rabbit hole again. Most of you already know that Canada leads the world in medically assisted suicide, with over 10,000 MAID deaths in 2021 alone. In my upcoming interview with Nicole Scheidel, the Director of Physicians for Life, which will be released on February 7th, you will learn, among many other things, why that 10,000 number is almost certainly low, possibly thousands low. And you might know that Canada also leads the world in organ transplants from MAID victims. In fact, Canada is now second in the world in organ harvesting for transplants in general. Who's first? China. And you can imagine where a lot of those organs are coming from. So here we are in Canada, under Purge government, leading the world in assisted suicide and in euthanasia-sourced organ transplants, and second only to China in organ harvesting in general. This despite the fact that our population is less than 3% the size of China's. Take a moment to wrap your head around that. A tiny country, at least in terms of population, is second only to the world's most populous country in harvesting organs. And how are we so competitive in this area? We use government-sanctioned murder, where the Chinese government just turns a blind eye to murder for profit, no doubt because they themselves are profiting under the table. Which brings us back to Bill S-223 and why the Trudeau-owned mainstream media won't talk about it. S-223 makes it very clear that harvesting organs for profit is illegal. In my recent interview with Dr. William Mackus, He talked about how his groundbreaking cancer research was taken from him shortly after Turge's election in 2015, with no explanation, and how Trudeau is deeply involved in setting up a large facility in Vancouver to sell Dr. Macca's treatment for cancer to overseas clients for between $100,000 and $500,000 a pop. It is furthermore conjectured that Trudeau owns private shares in that venture. In that interview, I floated my own theory, one which Dr. Macca had not considered to that point, but that he admitted certainly fit the facts. Remember that Turd is a graduate of the WEF's Young Global Leaders 5-year indoctrination program. So did he know that we would soon see a massive upswing in cancers? Is that why he stole Dr. Macca's research and is now monetizing it? Now add this final piece of the puzzle. Organ transplants have historically been hard to come by, and healthy organs even more so. You have to wait for someone to die, and for their organ to be healthy enough to be transplanted. A rare set of circumstances, except for the victims of MAID. Yes, some of them are facing certain death from terminal illness. For adults in full possession of their faculties, many of us believe they should have the option to die with dignity, rather than wasting away in ever-increasing pain. But our government has been actively pushing suicide as a solution to everyone's ills. Can't afford medical treatment? We'll kill you for cheap. In pain? Same solution. In March, it will likely become law in this country that people can choose MAID simply because they're depressed. And our government wants to make MAID available to what they refer to as mature minors. Children, as long as 14. Likely without parental consent. So here's the question, and the possible answer to why Turge's state-controlled media hasn't made so much as a whisper about S223. Is Trudeau setting up another medical procedure for profit racket? Will MAID victims in Canada who consent to donate their organs have those organs transplanted into foreigners for a fee? And if this happens, what's the likelihood that Trudeau will personally profit? I don't have those answers, but we should all be asking the question. Last week, I reported on the fact that the U.S. Department of Defense is behind the attacks on almost 200 food processing facilities in the U.S. Then there was my recently released interview with Sasha Latapova, revealing the fact that the Department of Defense not only funded vaccine manufacture to the tune of tens of billions of dollars, but also oversaw production and distribution. So you won't be surprised to find that the DoD is also behind the new Zero Trust Internet strategy, a report provided to President Biden in November. The proposed zero trust culture requires every person with a network to assume that it is already compromised and requires all users to prove their identities at all times, which means, of course, a digital ID required to access information. For now, they're justifying this as being specifically to protect government and Department of Defense data, but we all know it won't stop there. I'm currently in talks with Oliver Ross of Liberty Lives, with whom I produced a 9-part series last year on protecting your online privacy and how to circumvent censorship and digital ID requirements. I'll be bringing you that report as soon as it's available. In the meantime, you can access that 9-part privacy series at ironwillreport.com. That's all for this week's free version of the Iron Will Report. The full, much longer members version is available at ironwillreport.com when you sign up for a 15-day free trial. In this week's members report, Alberta Health Services computers crash as Danielle Smith is conducting a purge of AHS. Find out how many millions our federal government has spent on private contractors to redact documents. Embarrassing moments at Davos. An interactive vaccine harms dashboard is now online with data taken directly from the CDC's VAERS database. New inhalable vaccines entering stage 2 trials in Canada. I said it would happen. 15-minute cities planned for Canada. LGBTQ exclusive swim times at a Canadian university, and racial segregation returns to Canada. No whites allowed. Memberships at ironwillreport.com are just $9.95 per month and provide access to these weekly counter-narrative news reports, as well as exclusive interviews with experts, authors, and whistleblowers on a wide range of subjects that the state-controlled media won't report on and our government doesn't want you to hear.